This is Outfoxed, the podcast brought to you by Hunter.io, the trusted B2B lead generation platform built for every professional. Get ready for no playbooks, no posturing, and no egos. Your host is Hunter CEO Matt Tharp, and his guest today is Kristie Jones, the founder of the Sales Acceleration Group. Let's get into it.
Well, we're here with Kristie Jones. Kristie, welcome to Outfox. Really excited to pick your brain because there's a lot that you cover just in kind of your personal brand, but I think your book especially, that's going to really work well for the Outfoxed audience that we're still developing. So if you're new, there's not a bunch of backstory that you need to know to catch up on Outfoxed. You're here, you're in the right place. Kristie, I'd love it if you just introduce yourself. And I would especially love it if you could lean in on what made you decide that this was the focal point for your career, because you've wrapped a lot around some really interesting central themes. And I'd love for you to talk a little bit more about those.
Sure. Matt, thanks so much for having me. I'm pretty transparent about the fact that I'm doing consulting as a general profession as a result of being I say fired. My mother would prefer to be, that I not use that word. She was like, it was a reorg. I was like, well, okay, but I lost my job. I lost my job back in 2016. Okay. And I was on the hunt for a new, VP of sales or sales leadership role when I say the universe conspired to push me in this direction. Just a bunch of weird things happened. And I also say, when the universe speaks, you should listen. Consulting had always been of interest to me, but I still had a child in school. In high school. And so I thought in my brain, I had thought that it was going to require travel. And so I didn't want to miss those last couple of years of high school before he went off to college, and wasn't sure I would ever see him again. And so but this thing started happening, calls started coming in, people who didn't know that I had, was in the process of losing my job, were calling and asking about things and for help in ways that they had never asked before. And so before I'd gotten a 3 months grace period, basically. So they said, we're going to blow your team up here in St. Louis and rebuild it in Phoenix, Arizona under the marketing umbrella instead of under the sales umbrella. I was leading a SDR team of 13. And they said, if you'll keep the boat afloat for 3 months, we'll pay you 3 months severance. And, they being the financial girl that I am, that sounded like a good gig. They also were kind enough to say, we know you're going to have to be looking for a new opportunity. So as long as you show up to the office, every day for a little bit, that'd be great. But before that 3 months had expired, I had started a consulting business and I had 3 clients. And so I was kind of off to the races. The rest is a little bit of history. But I would say over that last about 10 years, I definitely leaned into, and I'd kind of grown up in B2B SaaS startups.
Okay.
And then at some point I'd done bootstrapped, and then I went to VC backed. And I say I got the VC backed bug. And I really love the VC world. But at some point, it took me a while, to really get comfortable saying, hey, I do B2B SaaS startups, 1 to 5 million in revenue in general. That's my swim lane. These are my people. And this is my expertise. So, I call it, I say you need to get small to go big.
I have a similar thing, which is, sometimes you do need to slow down to speed up. I find that while maybe trite, tends to actually be true a lot. I 100% agree with that.
Yes. So, that, and when I got comfortable with that, again, sometimes you have to get uncomfortable, right? Before things start to fall into place. But I resisted it for a while. But the fact of the matter is there are thousands and thousands of sales trainers, thousands of sales coaches, thousands of people who do sales workshops and those type of things. And really, I didn't at the end of the day, I would admittedly say, I don't think I'm bringing anything super unique to the table in that area, but I do bring something unique to the table in the startup world. Particularly helping people move from founder-led selling to building out their first sales team is sort of my sweet spot. And so that just, when I leaned into that and got comfortable with it and changed my LinkedIn, profile and really started writing content around those type of things, then I became the person whose name was on everybody's tongue when they were struggling, right? Who should I talk to? VCs and founders alike. But a lot of my business came from VCs early on, and you do some good work there. They've got a big portfolio. I call that the one-to-many strategy. If you can get one good channel partner, right? And I was able to get a few good channel partners that had good portfolios. So I also think that a lot of sales professionals need to get small to go big and understand what their superpowers are and what they do better than other people, and then find jobs that match that versus just trying to find a job.
I love that. I think there's been a lot of focus on that in the last, I want to say 5 years, but it could be a little bit longer than that. But just this idea that, so like early in my career when I was growing up in business, and it was like, I felt a lot of pressure to be good at things I wasn't good at. And I remember so many mentors and people around me early in my career trying to like make me more well-rounded. And all of that was great. I mean, I love learning and I like challenging myself, but somewhere in the last 5 or so years, there's been a shift to, I think, a better story around actually thinning yourself out isn't doing yourself any favors, and actually focusing in on what you're uniquely talented at and like finding your differentiator. We do it with businesses. Why not do it with ourselves? Like what were some of the techniques or what were some of the things that you used to figure out what that sweet spot was in a way that didn't make you feel like you were eliminating opportunities? Because I think that's what a lot of people struggle with, is they don't want to say no to things and they want to be opportunistic, but they are struggling to figure out how to do that while still focusing more. What are some of the tricks you found?
Yeah, I don't know that I found a mentor. That was trick number one.
That's a good one.
Who really pressured me, right? I reached out to her. She was a social selling expert, and in a group of female consultants that I belong to. And I reached out to her and said, hey, like I want to update my LinkedIn profile and some of the things about my, I wanted to look, jazzier, and can you help me? And she said, yes. And as we were going through and trying to update things, finally, she just said to me, I don't understand why you're not saying I help B2B startup founders. And I said, well, that's a pretty small universe. And, there's lots of other things I could be doing. And it's not like I'm not qualified to work with Fortune 500 companies.
Right.
And she said, but you've never done it. Do you want to do it? And I go, well, no. And she goes, why don't you just lean into this and become the B2B SaaS startup consultant and see what happens? And it was terrifying, right? Because, when I lived in the world of TAM, SAM, SUM, right? And I was like, oh, that's really, I'm like, the pond's very small. And the fact of the matter is the pond isn't that small, right?
Right.
And it is how I had grown up. The very first B2B SaaS company I worked in, I did, by the way, have a Fortune 500 experience for 8 years. And then my first job after that was a company with about 20 employees. And I spent 10 years there helping him double his revenue, the owner. And it was bootstrapped. Before the next job was my first VC-backed company. But I had been living in that world. But it seemed so, which I loved and was super comfortable. I left Fortune 500 and people said, what are you going to do? And what are you going to look for? Are you looking for another? I was working for Macy's and I working for another retail company. And I said, oh, heck no. I said, no, I don't like this at all. And so I said, no, I want a seat at the Knights of the Round Table. That's how I described it. I want a company small enough where my voice matters. I can have an impact. I can see how I'm making a contribution, as opposed to sitting in, Tommy Hilfiger's showroom in New York with my president, my GMM, my DMM, myself, and 2 other buyers, while they bring their, cohort of people, and I'm just basically became the secretary. So, I think it was scary, but it was the right move. The business has just gone to a place where I, work off referrals, right? I mean, I became that person.
It's amazing to think about that at one point you were afraid of focusing on this, because I think the transition from founder selling to figuring out how to create a sales org, gosh, the tentacles on that topic are just incredible. But first off, have been a founder, have been the first person to create sales at an org, have done a good job and a shitty job both. So I've had a chance to see all of that. And I find that it's all psychology. Getting founders to stop thinking about this as something that they don't want to do. There's a component of that was it's almost like you have to embrace it to be able to be okay hiring for it to a certain extent. Tell me more about this experience of how, what are some of the things that you found where you could add a lot of value when you were talking to founders about this transition? Because I think they're all going to go through it. And I think this is a really great experience to talk about.
So most times when I started getting the call was from the VC or a founder saying, hey, we just got money, right? So they've just gotten some Series A funding. We need them to stop selling, go back to their day job, and we need you to help them figure that out. And so initially I had made some mistakes myself with them where we went out and I was like, I'm going to find you the best seller, ever. And then a couple people failed. And I was like, oh, well, we didn't do this. This is the most important step that now I insist on, which is we have to get everything out of their head and onto paper because there was no playbook, right? Being salesperson number one is a very small group of people who are qualified and capable of doing that and willing to do that. But I decided that, we weren't making it any easier for them. And so, one of the things that I learned is I help them build out what I call the sales processes, call it the playbook, tie that out of the CRM system, make sure that that's customized. I get involved, and then I will do the hiring for them. I call it hiring help because we do it together. It's a team sport. And I basically project manage the hiring process. My team and I with them, we never leave them alone with the candidate. We don't trust them. We don't think they're qualified to make the right decision. But before that, like when I get that call, one of the conversations I have, the get honest with yourself conversation with the founder is, are you truly ready to give the baby up for adoption and hand it over to adoptive parents? Are you really willing to do that, willing and ready to do that? And then the other conversation I had with them, I got an opportunity to speak at a Business of Software conference in Raleigh. And the topic I spoke on was the founder advantage, which is really a disadvantage, right? So it becomes a disadvantage. But founder advantage is, they got themselves to $750,000, $1 million. That's how they got some funding, right? They had to get to a certain level on their own. And then, but what they didn't understand is when they hand the baby over, that person's name isn't founder or owner. They did not grow up perhaps in the industry in which they grew up. They did not create the baby over, 9 months or 19 months. And so there's an advantage to founder-led selling because of your Rolodex, because of who you are, because you know everything about the baby, right? And so I have to say to them, like, this isn't like, I'm going to get all this information out of your head, but you still, at the end of the day, you still did things differently than we're going to do them going forward. I'm going to take the good best practices and the things that worked really well for you that got you to $1 million, but I'm going to have to put them in a format that someone who isn't you can use in order to sell. And so, with those two agreements that, I will not be a meddling, parent and I will be patient. Yeah. Because even though my sales cycle might be 90 days, their sales cycle might be 120. And, that's just the way it is because you have founder advantages but sales rep number one is not going to have.
That's always been the biggest difficulty is the things that like founders are really good at selling because they get instant credibility. They're literally the ones deep in the wiring of the whole thing. They understand what the core problem was that inspired them to do this in the first place. None of that translates well.
No.
And you can't, and I think this was the mistake I made early on was like, oh, I should go out and hire a fleet of me. Like that's the secret to success when actually not only is that nearly impossible, it's actually not the right idea, right? The idea is not to replace founders selling with a bunch of mini founders. It's because that's insane. What was there any particular thing that you found as you would talk to founders that maybe as you would introduce candidates or something, was there a thing that you found that would flip the light on where they would be like, oh, I get it. This is just totally different. Because I feel like explaining it is not the same thing. It's not quite there.
I just think hearing the candidates. So, I lead those interviews, right? Okay. And so, one of the first things I'm looking for is similar or same motion, right? Again, it's hard enough to be seller number 1, 2, or 3 without, you were selling a 6-figure product and this is a $35,000 product. Your sales cycle was 9 months. This is 90 days. Like, so the first thing I'm asking for, I go, tell me every step in the process. Like, where do leads come from? What do you do with that? How does it go through? Because in general, I'm hiring what I call a full cycle seller, right? At this point, we're not hiring probably an SDR and an AE. We're hiring a full cycle seller. So you have one person doing things so you can figure out what's working, what's not working with as we move away from founder-led selling. But I think like just the question, like I asked them what their superpower is. I asked them about the most creative thing they've done to close a deal. I've asked them things that the founder probably hadn't thought about because they didn't have to do these things. And so, we obviously ask a lot of sales competencies, and then I asked them about their, biggest, I call it the biggest heroic failure. I said, you got your, you went to the dry cleaner, you got your Superman outfit because it's all clean now because you were going to save the day, right? You were about to close the big deal. It was in the bag. And then kryptonite showed up and it didn't happen. And, and I want to make them human too with the founder, right? Because the founder also lost deals and everybody loses deals. I said, there's no way that, in SaaS, we're lucky if we get a 20% close rate, but right now it's probably closer to 15, which means all 85% of deals are not closing. And so it's just as important to understand how people handle that. I don't believe in no, I believe in not right now. So I call them NRNs. And so, to me, nurturing is one of the most important skills that, a marketing and salesperson, the marketing department, perhaps partnered with the salesperson, can have, because sales is all about timing. And so if the not right now happens, then, there's 85% of your pipeline that are future buyers. But most people, again, like one of the things one of the formalizations of processes that I put together is a formal nurture strategy. Right. But most people don't have anything written down on how they're going to nurture a not right now, whether that happens before they ever get into the pipeline, like, call number one, no thanks, or whether that happens midway through the pipeline. After that first interview, that first candidate, and we debrief and they're like, wow, they're like, I would have not, those are questions I would not have asked. And I was like, that's right. And it's also why even sometimes I'm working with companies that have a recruiter or an HR department, I insist on running the phone screen myself. If you want to go through the resumes and pick them out and send them over to us, that's fine. I will teach them how to do that. But we need to do the phone screens. Like, it's just a different hire.
Today's episode is brought to you by Hunter.io, the B2B lead generation platform made for every professional. Whether it's prospecting, fundraising, recruiting, link building, or just trying to connect with the right people, Hunter makes it easy.
Thinking about the other end of the process a bit, changing gears, how many founders come back to you and say, gosh, I need to be in those sales calls. I get so much value out of talking to folks. It helps me understand my pipeline. Christy, how do I reintegrate myself with my sales team without stepping on toes and without turning into the founder in every single call and trying to take over the entire call? Like,
yep.
It's how does that come up? And like, real. I guess, yeah, how do you deal with that?
So it's a double-edged sword, because a lot of times the first sales leader is the founder. So we move them from founder-led seller to the first sales leader of the organization. And so I have to work with them on that as well. And I say to them, hey, listen, like, I do think there's a place for you in the sales cycle, but I think it's towards the end, right? Or somewhere in the middle where you send an email to their, C-level equivalent, or, our C-level, person over there, or whoever that would be. And just introduce yourself. Just say you're here if you need them. If you have any questions, I just got the update from Matt, and, things sound like they're going really well, but I just wanted to introduce myself. If there's anything that I can do while you and Matt are working together, please let me know. I'm happy to help or have a conversation. And then, so I always say, like, the best time to do that is not when things are falling apart at the end. The best time to do that, right, is early on when things are going well. And nobody, the pressure is lower, because sales is all about tension. Closing deals is all about increasing the tension. And so I think there's definitely, and I would never want to not, like, I always say the best person to close the deal at the company is whoever the best deal to close the deal at the company is, right? And that could be the founder at some point.
Yeah. Yeah, actually bringing them back in as a closer is often a very good technique. I want to talk about something about the sales process that both, honestly, if you're a founder and you're doing sales, this might often be the part you're the worst at. But even if you're a new seller, and I think some of the folks who probably read your books, this probably, I hope, catches them like it did me. And that is that, I forget exactly how you put it, but the summary is like taking responsibility for outcomes. Like, I don't think I've ever put it that way. Talk more about that. How did you come to that? Like, do you find that that's more about the seller or the founder or both? Like, do people resonate with this idea as well as I think they should?
Yeah, I call it creating a culture of accountability. And a lot of times, in fairness to the world that I live in, that hasn't really been necessary to a certain extent, right? I mean, like, you've got X number of employees, half of them are developers, they're all in, they're working hard, but we've not had other departments haven't appeared yet, right? Marketing hasn't appeared, sales hasn't appeared, finance hasn't appeared maybe you've got a fractional CFO. And so the culture of accountability, people, again, especially in my B2B startup world, my Silicon Valley life, culture is everything.
Oh, yeah.
But But the way they talked about culture didn't make sense to me because it was more about, I grew up in the, beer fridge, ping pong, right? Like jeans and sandals, young boys era, right? So,
Yep.
So it's like, it was when they talked about culture, it wasn't a culture of accountability. It was this this playground. Like we're creating an adult playground that you get to come to every day, and lunch will be free on Monday, Wednesday, and Friday. And then masseuse comes in on Thursdays. And I was like, okay, and so why the hell would anybody want to leave?
Yeah.
Right? Why would anybody want to leave the playground? The playground is fun. Every day is fun. But at some point, like someone's got to clean up the playground mess. You can't just leave every day. So I started, I say there are two reasons why everyone fails, companies and people alike. It's lack of discipline and lack of accountability culture. It wasn't that if things were complete chaos because they didn't have it, but I would walk in sometimes and there would be maybe a seller or there'd been a seller, and I would start to ask questions about quota. I would start to ask questions about activity expectations. And I mean, it doesn't surprise me anymore, but it surprises a lot of people when I say about a third of my clients who have somebody or have been doing if move past founder-led selling, but normally I came in because it's not working, have a seller, but they don't have any kind of accountability whatsoever. And so, and I said, everybody needs, like, if you think about going back to childhood, like everybody needs guardrails, right? And I say to leaders across the board, sales or anything, I want somebody, when somebody comes home at night and the person that asked them, the cat, the dog, the spouse, the girlfriend, the boyfriend, the child, how was your day at work? They should be able to answer that. They should know when they leave the door, so to speak, and come in the other one, whether they had a good day or a bad day. But when you haven't laid out what the expectations are, then that answer becomes, oh, it was fine. They know they had a bad day if they lost a deal. They know they had a good day if they won a deal. But Matt, as you know, like those are a lot of days in between that, right?
Right.
So how do you know if the activities you did today equated to a good day or a bad day? That's how I describe it. I'm like, people should know. People should not be curious, but people should not be wondering whether or not they had a good or bad day when somebody asks them a question.
Yeah. But you're right. There's so many, I think this is the disconnect and why I love that phrase of taking responsibility for outcomes. It's like, I find that the culture of accountability often turns into a culture of accountability of activities, not outcomes. And the activity is what you're doing, right? Did you make a call? Did you send an email? Those are very easily controllable and very low bars. But are you doing something to create an outcome is a very different framing. And I find that that's with the great sellers I've seen, and look, the ones that have been able to sell me too, part of what they've done effectively is constantly making sure they're getting the next step orchestrated, identifying blockers early, making sure those get removed. And if they're doing it right, it never feels like I'm being handled or managed or sold. It's a blessing. I was like, oh God, thank goodness they scheduled the next call.
Right. Someone's got a plan.
Yeah. And that's ultimately what you want, right? If you're the decision maker, is help me make the decision. And sometimes that means managing my schedule a little bit, managing the next steps, and I find that culture of the taking responsibility for outcomes really, for me, that was a great way of framing that. I guess, do you see activities replace outcomes? Like, is that the default that a lot of people fall into of thinking, I'm getting it done, right?
Well, and normally when things are bad, right? So that's like a punishment. So I was working with a client, I don't know, 4 or 5 months ago, and I had to say to the CEO, like, hey, this little game you've got going, because that's kind of what it was, where you get, so many points for, making a call and so many points for discovery and so many points for whatever. And you couldn't leave at the end of the week until you had X number of points. I said, there was no reason to bring me in to work with this team, which I had worked with previously. And because I said, I'm about quality, not quantity. And these are like multi-year sellers that you're treating like SDRs. And it's just a matter of time before turnover starts to happen, and like it's in complete opposition of what I'm trying to teach them, which is, instead of trying to get on and off the phone as quickly as possible so you can get your points and get on to the next call, they'd hired me to also teach them how to write custom and personalized emails, of which they were getting 0 points for. We were teaching them to check their brain at the door, right? Calling for calling's sake. First off, that is so not fun.
It's the worst.
Would I want to get up every day just to make 50 calls and, and leave 48 voicemails? And, that is so not fun. Like that job is so unfun, which is why the SDR job's a burnout job.
Yeah.
Right. Because we make them do all these unfun things every single day for 18 months before we tell them that they're ready to sell, which they're not because they haven't talked to anybody and they haven't done anything. They haven't written a personalized email. I get where people, like I say, panic causes bad decisions. And the number one reason that people panic is anemic pipelines. Right. And so when the pipeline is lower than it needs to be, then all of a sudden people are like, then leaders push, like, they're like, well, then we need to do more, like more of what wasn't working.
Right.
That's what we're doing, right? We're going to do more of what wasn't working because if we do more, statistically, that's going to work out for us. No.
I had, I think, almost this exact same conversation with somebody yesterday, interestingly enough, where I was like, okay, so what you're talking about is you're going to fix the volume part of the problem. But what we were just talking about is that it's not converting. So is fixing the volume issue going to solve the conversion issue? And if it's not, then is it even worth doing? Okay, one thing you haven't talked about yet, the technology part, the tech stack. There's a lot of people in marketing or sales or growth roles in general, revenue roles today, who will come in and they'll tell you, well, the secret is you've got to hook up these sets of tools and your tech stack needs to look like this. That doesn't seem core to your narrative, though.
No, I love a good tech stack. I love a good software. And in fact, they're getting more fun, right? Like, things that didn't exist last year are popping up and you're like, oh, like that's cool. We didn't have that before. Yeah. The reason I don't talk a ton about it is because without good processes, good strategies, it just helps you do more of what isn't working more quickly. And so I'm like, okay, like sounds good, briefs well. If it's already bad, AI is just going to make it bad more quickly. Like if you just have more bad, right? I'm now like doubling down on process, right? I'm now saying, where you might have been able to be at 80% of good, or you may be able to fly by the seat of your pants a little bit. No, because you're going to now go into an AI tool and give it a prompt of how you want something done. And if your prompt isn't, crisp and very succinct and what exactly you want, then if your process is half-baked, then that's just going to do something half-baked a lot faster than you were doing it before.
I mean, it sounds a little bit like VC funding in that regard. If you're doing it wrong, adding more money to it is only going to help. I mean, that's ultimately what VC is really about, right? You raise money so you can go faster at doing whatever it is you're doing. You seem to have a very pragmatic point of view about VC, like I do, which is good. You're not obsessed with it.
I say to founders, like, hey, don't just take the money, right? The reason to get VC money is not just the money. It should be the experience level. So who's going to sit on the board? Who's going to mentor you? I remember one of a very early founders. It was a cybersecurity company, and it was actually client number one. And I kept coming to me with questions, and I go, "I'm sorry, I'm just confused." I'm like, there are people in that organization that gave you money that know the answer to these questions. Why aren't you getting that kind of help? And I had to reach out to the VC, the managing partner who'd put me in there, and said, "Hey, you guys are failing this guy, and why aren't we doing quarterly portfolio, 3-day sessions? If he's got these questions, everybody's got these questions. Like I said to him, I'm like, all of these people, like all the VC, the managing partners that I work with, general partners, they've all been there, done that, right? And that's why they have the money. They wouldn't have money to invest had something not gone well along the way. I do a lot of work mentorship with accelerators, and I worked with an organization that just coached people on pitch decks. And, getting these pitch meetings. And I would just say, like, hey, don't just take money to take money, right? Because at some point, you're going to hit a wall and you're going to need someone to help you, like, figure it out, pick up some pieces or whatever. And so make sure that the backbone of the VC, has the kind of people that you think are going to help you, and that they're, the kind of people that are going to sit on your board. So, and I also say, like, I get tired of hearing, because of the world I live in, I get tired of hearing, like, 67% of sellers are missing quota and 72% of sellers are missing quota, and whatever that percentage du jour is for the day. And I'm like, I know, but the VCs are putting unrealistic expectations. And like, so I said, well, where does that start? That starts with them giving you an unrealistic goal so they can get their money back. And then you go and divide that by the 3 sellers you have when you really need 5, right? Like no one, like it's just, you're putting unfair expectations on people. So I say, yes, there are lots of reasons why sellers aren't hitting quota, but some of them are VC related. So yes, I have a very pragmatic view. There are lots of things that I could talk about in this topic, but I mean, I'd like to see more diversity,
Yep.
I'd like to see more women. I'd like to see more minorities within the VC world. And I just read an article the other day about women supporting women funding women out of California. And, we did that, and this happened in St. Louis too. We had a group of women that came together. The founder of Build-A-Bear is here out of St. Louis. Yeah. And Maxine Clark, and she started a VC with women for women. But we shouldn't have to, good for her. I love that. Like, I love her for that. I got involved, but we shouldn't have to do that.
Agreed. Yeah.
Right.
100%. It's one of the first things I look at, actually. Like I call it a pragmatic point of view, because if you talk to a lot of early stage or first time founders, they don't think there are options. Like, bootstrapping is what you do if you're apparently a nerd or something. And, VC is what you do if you're going to build a company. And I'm like, well, is it though? Like, if you're going to build a big company, probably. If you're going to build something that has to move really quickly, yeah, probably. But does every single, I think SaaS is proven enough now that you don't have to de-risk that first million. I just love it when people are rational about VC, because I think what also happens is VCs end up dealing with a lot of folks that aren't rational about it. And they just are yes, the VC's job is to put pressure, because their whole thing is to try to replace, it's to get you to pay back. But people think about it like it's the only way you can build a company. And I find it's often the wrong way to build a lot of the companies that I'm talking to, right? And whether that's the founding or whether they're advising or whatever, it's just it's often misaligned. I watched a really, really incredible AI company who was working on exactly the right problem with the exact sort of approach to the technology that OpenAI was. And honestly, things like board dynamics and how much the valuation was too early, all of these were things that ended up disrupting the company, not the tech, not whether or not they were building a product. And that, to me, is an example I see more often than not, which is unfortunate. I'm fully for VC in the right circumstances. And I think you're right.
Agreed.
It's as a network function, amazing.
Mm-hmm.
I love talking to you about this. This is fun. Okay, I think we're getting close to time, and I haven't even asked you where in Kansas you grew up.
I grew up in several places in Kansas, but I spent most of my time in Topeka. But I spent some of my formative years in a Mennonite community called Garnett, Kansas. Okay. Yep, we were not Mennonites, but my dad worked for the United Telephone Company, so we got bumped around a lot. So I lived in this small Mennonite community, which was an amazing experience. The school was K through 12, all in one building. It was really Little House on the Prairie. And then we moved from there to Russell, Kansas, which I affectionately call the armpit of Kansas. Sorry to Bob. My apologies to Bob Dole. Grew up in Russell. It is awful. I mean, I literally thought tumbleweeds were only something that you saw on the Roadrunner cartoon until I moved to Russell, Kansas.
We got there.
And I was like, oh my gosh, I just thought that was a cartoon thing. I had no idea that tumbleweeds actually existed. But yeah, so no, I spent time in 3 cities, and then Lawrence. As you know, I'm a Jayhawk, so spent 4 years in Lawrence. So yeah, I have very fond memories of Kansas. But yes, I spent a lot of I lived around the state.
You had a lot of mindfulness time in Kansas.
I did. That's so fair.
I grew up in Wichita, and it's just
I spent time in Wichita.
That was my upbringing, and I've mentioned to James a handful of times that no, you don't understand. Basketball season is the real season, and it's Shockers and Jayhawks, man.
That's right.
Every childhood team I had was either a Jayhawk or a Shocker for a solid 10 years of my life.
Nice. I mean, so you didn't lean into the purple people, as I affectionately call them.
No. When you have Wichita State and KU,
you were closer to the purple people than you were to the Jayhawks.
Well, but I grew up a Shocker. So that was my alma mater originally. And
there we go.
I was watching Shocker games from the time I was 3 years old, probably, or maybe even younger.
Nice.
Did you ever get back? Do you ever go back to Kansas?
Oh, all the time. Yeah.
Oh, yeah.
Yeah, I'm a season ticket holder for basketball and football. And I have relatives that still live in Kansas City. So I'm there all the time. So yeah.
But you're in St. Louis, right?
I am. Yep.
That's a haul.
Yep. The hardest days are the down and backs. Yeah, we play the Purple People Saturday at 11. So we decided not to leave at 5:30 in the morning. So we're leaving Friday night after my son gets off work. So we'll leave about 5. And then I asked him, I'm like, is it okay? We've got so many people we can stay with and hang with. But as I talked to you, I've been traveling for so many weeks. I said,
yeah,
okay, if we come back after the game on Saturday, as opposed to spending the night and coming back on Sunday. He goes, yep. I'm like, thank you.
I feel like one of the longest drives ever was after KU wins in Allen Fieldhouse and then driving back to Wichita. That was, I felt like it was 3 times longer than the game. It wasn't actually.
Well, you've been to the Fog.
Of course. Yeah. That's, you got a bucket list item right there if you're even remotely a basketball fan.
Yeah, we do. We appreciate it. I know we do. But it is like every time I go, like I can get a little teary. Like just seeing like when they play the hype video on the screen, like, and I see all the past, players. And that's what I think this is the hardest thing for me right now with NIL. I was pro paying them. I was all in. I didn't know how we were going to do it. I didn't know how we were going to figure it out. I was all in on paying them. And now it's like my worst nightmare because all these one and dones. I mean, like I just saw what we think is the starting lineup for the basketball team, and only only one player was there last year. And so I said, I screenshotted, forwarded to my son. And I was like, here we go again, learning new names and numbers every year. Got to learn new names and numbers. And I was like, because it was so much fun. I just, Christian Brown, just got a new contract with the Denver Nuggets for $125. But I heard an interview last night with him that said, I stayed in my high school and played from my high school for 4 years. I stayed at KU, I went to KU. I didn't leave KU. I graduated from KU, and I want to do the same with the Nuggets. And I thought, wow, kid, he's got 4 more years. But I said, wow, kid, that no one does that anymore.
Nobody.
Like if you really if you can really end your career with the Denver Nuggets, like you started your career, like you did at KU and you did at high school, I said, you'll be one of you'll be the unicorn in your world.
It's it is weird. Oh, I feel like that whole transience of careers these days.
Right.
It's not even basketball centric, but like in general, it feels like everything is a combination of the NIL and the portal.
It's funny that you say that because I can bring this back to sales really quickly because people you get that interview question from the candidate, like, what will make me successful here? And my answer is, and I'm just like sassy and smartass about it. I'm like, if you'll stay 3 years. If you'll stay 3 years, but you won't. And so you're just going to continue to make your life hard because the first year, you don't know what the hell you're doing. You're just figuring it out. Year 2, you've got your process, you understand where your superpowers are within the process that we've created and you're working the process and then you leave. But if you stayed for the 3rd year, all of those 85% of people who didn't buy from you, all those 85% of the NRNs, the phone will start to ring. Mm-hmm. The email will start to come in. So I said, if you really want to be successful, you'll stay 3 years. And I think I feel the same way about basketball.
I couldn't agree more. But most businesses are not very good at figuring out how to keep people for the 3rd year or the 4th year. And I find that this is a problem we have on both sides of the business. It's not even just whether or not a sales rep can be successful. Organizations have a responsibility to make that.
That's right.
Appealing.
When I just saw a statistic the other day, the average CRO stays between 12 and 15 months, the median time. So again, if you're a seller and if you stayed 3 years, you could hypothetically have 3 different leaders in 3 years. Versus, again, my coach Bill Self, been around a while. Right. Larry before him, Roy before him, like they stay around a while. Right. And so I do think you can make a nice parallel, which is when we, yes, the CEO, so, call it the general manager or whatever is normally around, but not always, by the way. But when the top of your umbrella food chain, when the top of the sales umbrella is turning over every 12 to 15 months, which probably means the VP is doing the same and the director is doing the same.
Yep.
Then there's there's inconsistency, right? You don't, and then everybody wonders why they're struggling to hit quota.
Yeah. And they're not going to learn what they need to learn to get to the next level. Agreed. Well done bringing it back, by the way.
Thank you.
That was crafty.
I can make a sports analogy and a business analogy work every day.
Perfect. This was really great, Kristie. Thank you. I think the audience is really going to appreciate it. It's great to meet you.
Matt, thanks so much for having me on.
Once again, thank you to Kristie for joining today's episode of Outfoxed. If you liked what you heard, please like, subscribe, and explore even more of the Outfox community by visiting www.outfoxed.hunter.io. She was Kristie Jones, that was Matt Tharp, and we're out of time.